Forbes Books presents Leading What Matters Most, the podcast that helps you change behaviors, improve performance, and unlock the potential of your people. Here's Phil Geldart.
So Wes, it's a wonderful to have you on the show today. Thanks very much. I'm going to take a minute and just let our audience know who you are so that they can appreciate all the talent you bring. You're the Vice President of People and Corporate Affairs at Bimbo Canada, which is one of the world's largest baking companies. And you lead the organization's vision for driving growth through talent development and culture, which we'll chat about today, which is great. When you look back over your resume, you've got many, many years of experience and an amazing track record, actually, and a lot of qualifications, but often in the HR side, wellness culture, corporate transformation, labor relations, worked with a number of great companies, as well as serving on a lot of boards, and very passionate about transforming the industry you're part of. So it's great to have you. Thank you very much.
Yes, it's my pleasure. So, and it's my first day back from a week of vacation too. So I've been looking forward to this conversation to get my brain back focused on what it needs to be this week.
Okay, well, that's good. Where did you go on your vacation?
I'm actually still in Florida. So I was on vacation, and now I'm just going to be working for another week down here. So it's terrific, and the weather's been fantastic. So I cannot complain.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. So one of the things that really stood out was Bimbo is committed to a people-first culture, which is clearly your priority. So can you just talk to me a little bit about that? And I'm really interested in what that means in practice and why you feel it's so important, because I think that is so crucial in today's world.
It really is the question, I think, that that kind of sits on my shoulder. It sits on in the front of my mind. It sits in the back of my mind pretty much every day. And I think, I don't know if this is something that happens as you get older, but I find myself spending an awful lot of time thinking about things in this space. And I've really come to appreciate what Grupo Bimbo, and you're right, as you said in the introduction, it's the largest baking company in the world. And I have the pleasure of serving in the Canadian business division. And globally, our organization, we call this, or we're calling it now, the Bimbo way. And what does that mean? And it's the way we do things around here. And if, in layman's terms, we think about culture as sort of what happens when no one's looking, it's the way things are done around here. It doesn't just happen. Like it's something that does, in my view, at least anyway, have an intentional purpose behind it. And globally, our organization, we are relentless about sharing our purpose, which is to nourish a better world. We tie that together with our mission, which loosely is about having nutritious baked goods and snacks in the hands of all. And for me, where the rubber hits the road is our philosophy, which is about building a sustainable, highly productive, and deeply humane company, and wrapping all of that around a set of organizational beliefs, which start with valuing the person. And those four things together really form the basis of our identity. And they're not just, words on a poster that hang on a wall. They really are the way that our founding fathers expected that our organization would treat people, would treat society, would tackle the challenges of our business and the relationship with, millions and millions and millions and millions of consumers around the world. And as I said, as the older I get, the more I start to appreciate that I'm starting in an organization I'm starting with a great foundation that an organization that's been around for almost 80 years has established. And it's such a great place to start from. In many respects, a lot of the guesswork had been taken out of it for me. It's not anything that I had to create from scratch myself, but I get the privilege of trying to bring that to life in the Canadian business and influence that globally. And I think that's what I've really started to enjoy doing in my role right now in Canada.
Okay, you've raised a lot of questions I'd like to ask you, but let me backtrack. Talk to me a little bit about the role of your executive in making that culture happen and bringing it to life, because obviously you've stepped into an organization that aligns clearly with your values, but as you say, has already got a foundation. So how did that happen?
Well, I'll speak from the Canadian perspective, and then dabble in a little bit of the global perspective. But from Canada, our president in Canada is she's grown up in this business, so the only job she's ever really had working in our organization through a series of different ownership structures. But started as a trainee right out of school, and now is the president of our Canadian business, and there is no more humble, kind of kick-ass, aggressive, smart, humane, sensitive, caring, empowering, curious, challenging leader than her. And she's just a wonderful example to have at the top of the Canadian business, to continue to challenge us to do all of those things. And she is sort of the consummate example, in my view, of balancing that deeply humane and highly productive. And those are the two things I'm going to refer to that probably a lot in our conversation, because by necessity, those two things are meant to exist in a dynamic tension, if you will. It's never supposed to be results at the expense of people. It's always supposed to be results through the efforts of people. But that doesn't mean you can just be a bunch of swell people that can't, to use a good Canadian sports analogy, put the puck in the net. It's a constant challenge to balance both. And our Canadian president is so astute at doing that. She's highly regarded within our own organization in Canada, the rest of our executive team, and Grupo Bimbo globally, I think, is being a truly humane leader, and one that has, frankly, a track record of success behind her, where she can put the puck in the net and does put the puck in the net, but does it in a way that really underscores the importance of culture, and that it's not one at the expense of the other. It's both. And how do we constantly, work to achieve both, recognizing that, it's a lifelong journey. Like, you never get there and say, oh, finally I did it. There are moments, in our journey, I think, where we say, nailed it on that. There's also moments where we go, probably could have done a better job there. And so constantly having the good sense to revisit those things. And so I think that's the Canadian experience, Phil. And I think globally, it's a family-run business. And, for almost 80 years, the business has always been led globally by a member of the same family, until very recently, earlier this year, the first non-family member has been given the reins at the top of the house globally. And it's really nice to see that he, he's not torpedoing the culture. He, in fact, is, as a disciple of it, although he hasn't lived his whole life in the business or in our organization. So it's really nice to see that evolution. But the expectation is clear, and we don't always do a great job of it every day. And that's not the goal. The goal is to be aware of what the aspiration is, and balancing deeply humane and highly productive, and then constantly using that as a bit of a yardstick to gauge how we're doing.
So how does your CEO help her executive team absorb her own convictions and passions around this? Are they operating in the same way, just automatically? Does she promote it? Does she rely on you to provide additional support? Because clearly the way she feels is cascading down. So how is that happening?
It's a great question. I think, how it happens. She is just someone who people naturally gravitate to. I mean, she's a lovely person. She's funny. She's interested in what you have to say. So she is somebody who genuinely kind of pulls people in as a tractor beam of in her tractor beam of attraction, if you will. But it doesn't come easily. Like, once she gets our team in the room, and I've again had the good fortune over the last couple of years since she's been our president, to help rebuild our executive team with her. And, she will never settle when it comes to talent. She wants the right people around the table to engage in the right dialogue and debate. And we often say that, if a meeting is not just to be comfortable, we constantly need to be challenging each other. And someone had said, I can't remember specifically the words, but they said, a meeting, our executive team's determination of whether a meeting was good or not depends on how much we argue. And someone said, I don't know that it's arguing as much as it is challenging and debating the status quo, and not just being individual siloed subject matter experts that could all come and espouse views on their particular part of the business and have everybody else go, oh, well, that sounds good. What Mary-Eve expects from us is, myself as the head of the people function, I have just as much a say in whether I think an initiative in our supply chain is going to be successful or not as someone in finance does about something that I might be putting on the table. And so really building that camaraderie where if you were to walk into one of our executive team meetings, it might be a bit mysterious for you for a while to know what my job is in the company and what so-and-so's job is in the company. And really just, she surrounded herself with a group of like-minded people who are comfortable having those kinds of discussions and debates. And it doesn't mean that we dislike each other. When you disagree, I can still say, you know what, I love you and let's go have a beer, but we're going to do right for our people and we're going to do right for our organization. And the only way that that happens is by cultivating that kind of an environment. So that's what it looks like at the executive level. And that may sound cliche, but it's probably the first time that I've ever really been able to see it. I've generally worked in organizations or even in this one where whether you call it the power imbalance or the dynamic around the executive table is still a little bit more, it's probably more traditional. There's like a few people who will say things and a few other people who may agree or disagree, but no one's going to really challenge things in that moment. And so it's sort of a conditional type experience where we're now building a much different way of leading our organization because it's what's necessary. Like the number of challenges that our business faces, on a daily basis, much less looking 5-10 years down the road, it demands that of us. And Mary-Eve is just, she's outstanding at doing that. And then she could jump easily from that kind of a conversation to going out on the floor in one of our bakeries and, engaging in a discussion with someone, one of our production workers on the floor, skilled trades worker on the floor, and really connecting with them in just a couple of moments. She always cares about what people, think, how they feel, what she can do to help make their existence a little bit better. And it's quite a privilege to watch, her in action because it's just who she is normally. And it's just such a great example. And I hope that maybe I can be like her when I grow up one day.
It's great to hear the story because I am very much of the opinion the body follows the head. So when you have a CEO that can do all those things, then she's modeling the things that she wants. And it's easier to learn and to take that, into advisement. So one of the things when you talked about sort of deeply humane, I'd love you to unpack a little bit about what that means. But just before you do, I think the way in which she has approached the executive team, valuing everybody's opinion, not putting undue weight on one function versus another function, you feeling free to speak up, I think is an example of deeply humane, because otherwise it sounds like, I don't exactly know what does humane mean, but I think that's a great example, treating everybody with respect. But maybe you give an additional thought, because I'm sure others in the organization are saying, okay, so how do I translate that aspiration into my day-to-day work? What would you say?
What would I say to that? I think, I think you're right. Like it is an example of what deeply humane looks like. I think sometimes she will, when she knows who's got the strong opinions, like she finds a way to facilitate conversations, knowing that, a lot of the problems aren't her. I mean, ultimately they're hers to solve as the president of the company. But she gives us the voice and the license to say, this is your organization, and there's not much bureaucracy, if you will, between her and us exacting real change in the business. So by getting all of us, around the table to help, to help shape those discussions, to make the right decisions. I mean, in my view, looking at it as her trusted advisor, I'm hopeful that when we have those discussions, what it doesn't do is require either her or I to go run around to the rest of the organization and say, so, in that discussion, here's what we really meant, but now you need to do this. Like, it's just, we don't have time for that, and her, one of the things that I think she's taught our executive team, that deeply humane does in many respects mean it's about efficient leadership. And how do we get to the heart of things as quickly as, not necessarily as quickly as possible, but in the shortest direction or the shortest number of steps. And maybe that does mean the quickest way possible, but it's not about passing over things, just to say, cross the I, dot the T. But what's the shortest, most efficient way to get the right stakeholders involved to make a decision? Because she, and I think none of us really have the patience to go around trying to have the conversations after the conversations, just like how some people have, the pre-meeting to the meeting to the pre-meeting and all of that stuff. Like, it's a waste of time. And so maybe as I say the word waste, that is something that our organization is relentless about, and, just fastidious about eliminating from our organization. And I think the way that we talk in our organization about being deeply humane, it's intended to be efficient. It is intended to eliminate waste and bureaucracy in making people just feel good if it's coming at the expense of something else, or, focusing just on results, when behind the scenes you go, well, that's great that you focused on results, but the way you got them wasn't at all consistent with how we act as an organization. And so I think it's almost like you want to walk around with like a little one of those like an air traffic controller helmet on or whatever, that's pointing, that's kind of picking up signals from every which way. But yeah, and I think, like, as a good example of what it means to be, or how deeply humane shows up in how Mary Ave leads, some great examples as we've been building our executive team and our talent bench. We've had the opportunity through some internal moves to add some new folks to our organization. We've rarely added as many different faces, and these aren't incremental positions, but different faces to our executive team. And the trust that Mary Ave has in including other folks on the executive team in the candidate selection and review is something that I don't think a lot of other leaders would necessarily do. And she values their perspectives greatly, because, and not because they're easy people to get along with, but because they've got, some are great people leaders, some are ones who ask the tough questions, some are the ones who understand our business deeply. And so I think surrounding herself with people who can help her make a good choice, even if it's not a fast choice, but it's efficient, because we're trying to weed out all of the noise that one person and one set of eyes might miss. I think it empowers those people in turn to think about, for example, building talent in the same way, and saying, who are those people in the business that you trust to weigh in on a decision to bring somebody into your organization? Because it is very much a family, and it's not about whether they can do their job. It's how are they going to fit with the rest of the organization, because it matters. It matters greatly how, probably more so, how people fit. If, very, very generically, you say we could teach some of the technical skill, but living in our environment and really being able to balance what it means to be both highly productive and deeply humane, it's not for everybody. And I will readily tell people that it is not a place that everybody can succeed in. You really have to embrace what the expectation is of you when you join our organization.
Wow. It's amazing. Let me picture a leader, a frontline leader, supervisor, or a warehouse supervisor, where their priority is presumably, or running one of the factories or the manufacturing sites, their priority is clearly to get the product wherever it's got to go. How do you get them to adopt this sort of people-centric thinking, the deeply humane thinking, especially they're early in their career, they get no exposure visibly, presumably, to the more senior executives. How do they bring that culture to life for the rank and file?
Yeah, well, this is exactly where our focus, is right now in the organization, and probably will be for a while. And I'll tell you, it's not easy. And at the end of the day, it is super easy, but it's not easy with that cohort of people. And I'll stick with the frontline supervisor group, because they are they are probably they are the unsung heroes in our organization. They are the group of people who get pulled at from every direction. They are responsible for getting product out the door. They are responsible for executing everything that gets pushed down from the organization. And there's only so much time and energy and effort to go around. And so what do you choose first? And so I'll back up and just talk a little bit about what we've been able to, I'd say, unlock in the last couple of years. And if you go back to sort of the tail end of COVID and the great, the great labor challenges and labor shortages and all of that stuff, we were not immune from that either. We were struggling with significant turnover in our business. It was hard to find good people. And through the combination of a bunch of leaders in our organization, we finally got our arms around things and said, enough about pointing fingers. It wasn't a fun place to sit in my shoes in 2022 when I had, all kinds of vacancies across the organization, and you have salespeople saying, hey, we want to sell stuff and we don't have enough people to produce the product. Like, it's an uncomfortable spot to be in, but no one said, hey, Les, it's your fault. And instead, as a team, we said, what's driving this? And so through, as I said, a bunch of different folks in the organization collectively, and this is a cross-functional selection of folks in finance, in supply chain, in HR, supported by our executive team and all of the other functions, we said, what is it that's driving, what's causing the issue? We need to sell product. We can't make product. How are we going to sell, or how are we going to make the product? And we said, well, in order to make product, we need people. Well, why don't we have people? And there were a number of things, including the ownership at a bakery level. So a bakery in Moncton might have a different experience than a bakery in Calgary versus a bakery in Toronto versus a bakery in Montreal or Vancouver. And I think because it's been easy, relatively speaking, in the past, most leaders would say they want a generic across-the-board solution in Canada. And, one of the easy things to draw on would be to say, oh, it's money. Pay people more and it's the solution to all of our problems. Well, that clearly hadn't worked. And so one of the things that my team was, I would say, instrumental in doing was helping provide facts and the detail to each of our site leaders with the complete support of all of our supply chain folks and backed up by finance to say, here's the experience in your particular site. So, for example, if we had a site that said, we need 30 people, and we say, my team would say, well, you needed 30 people. We've hired, and I'm making up this number for effect, Phil, but let's say we've hired 200 people. You don't have a hiring problem. We have a retention problem. And so let's, now dig a little deeper. And finally, when faced with data on a specific, relevant basis to each of our leaders, that's when they finally started going, oh, maybe there is something here, because it's not just, a wave the wand singular issue that, my team is going to fly in and solve. And so anyways, as I'm going down the rabbit hole and telling you that, but it's important to do it because our leaders have gone from being, our frontline supervisors, I think, have gone from a place of saying, I'm just going to do whatever I get asked to do, to now 2.5 years later, feeling I have a handle on, what the reality is of my recruitment situation. I have learned how to embrace my engagement survey feedback for good. One of the things that I'm sure we'll probably talk a little bit more that I know is an important priority for us in Bimbo Canada is safety. How do they look at their safety numbers and all of their leading indicators as an input into what people, want, why people stay, why people leave, what do they need from us as their employer? They look at exit interview data, and lo and behold, as soon as we packaged all of that stuff up, what we saw was supervisors who went, man, this isn't that hard at all. I now have a recipe for what I think can help make a difference. And so we invested in an initiative that the name might not track well for everybody, but it's, for lack of a better term, it's called Superior Quality of Life. And it was Really an initiative, a broad umbrella that covers a lot of things that we've done in our organization to really focus on what does it mean to be a frontline associate in our bakeries. What is it, what do you want? What do you need? How do we give it to you? And particularly in that supervisory group, in order for them to be successful, they need to know what it is they need to do. They need to know that they've got the support and resources to do it. And as a business, the only thing we really need to do is give them the time and energy to do it. And so one of the things we heard, if there was one thing that we heard consistently across all of our bakeries, was they said, we need some help to think consistently about how to onboard folks right, how to give them the right training experience, just to sort of tie together all of these things that supervisors were in the past thinking they had to go alone. And magically now, 2 years later, we find ourselves with essentially full employment, a stable workforce, supervisors who now have time to breathe and actually spend time talking to their associates on the floor. It's not easy. Don't get me wrong. We haven't solved everything yet, but the business improvement that we have seen as the result of, solving the labor stability question, it's been unparalleled. I've worked in this organization for 17 years, and we have never had as much stability. And when I say stability, that's not just good luck. That's stability where we've got strong retention, and we're starting to know why. And when you know why people stay, it makes it easier to do your job day in and day out. And I think that's part of a bigger trend that organizations are trying to figure out is, what is this all about? And, ironic being down here in the States where for the first time yesterday, after 10 days here, there was a scrap at the pool about the election. And I was it was like watching a car accident. I kind of wanted to be there to see it happen, but I sort of wanted to step away and was glad I wasn't in the middle of it. And I think there's a lot of analogy to those things when I think about our workforce. And so our supervisory group, I think, deserves far more support and far more credit for the work that they've done. And we're getting there. So we've got, early indications that we're on the right track anyway. So sorry, really long answer.
No, it's great. It's great. That's great, Liz. So I want to see if I've captured a couple of things. On the one hand, you were able to equip those frontline folks with the tools and the information that they needed to address the issue, and you allowed them to take action and be involved, as opposed to head office making a decision and just, we're going to pay them all more money or something. So yep. I think that's an example in my mind of being deeply humane. You're treating the folks as adults. You're giving them the abilities and the resources that they need to go function location by location to deal with the issue.
Yeah.
So that's very cool. The other side, it seems to me as though you and your team did a lot of work to provide that support. So talk to me a little bit about the degree to which keeping this culture alive is a result of what you and your team do to kind of feed the machine. I know that it's not, you don't do it, but you seem to make it something that I can do with the tools you give me. So I just want to push in a little bit to better understand how HR has helped to facilitate and accelerate the kind of results and culture that you're getting.
Yeah. So what I would say, it starts with data, and data turns into insights. And my expectation of all of my HR business partners out in the field is that they're engaged in the local businesses that they support. And that's typically in our universes, it's structured regionally. So I don't expect someone in Halifax, for example, to understand what's going on in BC. They probably have an awareness because they partner, across the country. But it starts with really understanding as just as I am the trusted advisor to our president, they need to be the trusted advisors to their local facility managers. And that means they need to understand, what the volume forecasts look like, what are the challenges in the business, what's happening in the market, how are things, like what's the general flavor of that business. And then I expect them to listen. I expect them to start thinking and put their critical thinking skills to work and say, what data can I get as their people resource to help inform, the way that plant leader or distribution center leader is thinking about the business. And how do I go and gather the data? What are and data is, it's not just, for example, having an HR manager in Atlantic Canada go and pull a bunch of exit interview data, for example. That's the easiest one to look at. And then just hand it over to the plant manager and say, here you go. They need to be able to look at the data and say, and determine whether it's worth sharing or not. Like you go, there's no story here. That's a critical insight that you need, to give to your plant leader and say, I've looked at your exit interview data. There's nothing there. However, I have gone and looked at some of your, for example, your safety indicators, and it feels like we've got a problem that's emerging here and here. Or I've gone and looked at your last engagement survey, and it seems like this was an area that was identified. I think we need to do more there. So data and insights, it's not just data and it's not just factless insights, because factless insights, in my view, are just a lot of excuses for the way things have always been done or why you don't want to do something. One of the best examples is with foreign recruitment. We would say it's never going to work in Canada. It's never going to work. I used to be one of those people who would say can't do it. So when you actually start to dig into the data, and you can use data to inform and provide insights to our operations leader, that's what the ticket really was. And the couple of things that we used in HR were recruitment data. So having a lay of the land of what is your recruitment situation? Is it you have lots of candidates, but you can't land any, and why not? Is it money? Is it shift arrangements? Is it schedule requirements? Like what is the issue? Or is it there are no candidates to be found? Like there isn't anybody. So we have a different problem. So what's the recruitment reality? What is your exit history been? Voluntary exits. Why are people leaving? What do we do to try and understand those? And that's a particular challenge because, hourly folks perhaps are a little bit less loyal than salaried folks historically, where they could leave and not necessarily do an exit interview or say, don't really care. They go out for lunch and they leave and they don't come back. Again, that's been a data point, if you will, in the past that I think my team, me, other leaders in years past would say, well, we don't collect exit data from hourly people. Ergo, it's probably the problem. We can't quantify it. So we said, no, it's not an excuse. You've got to lean in and understand what that looks like. Our engagement survey results, we do one every year. And over the last couple of years, the assistance that my team has been able to lend to our frontline leaders is to say, look at this. And, shockingly, when you get a strong participation, the data that you can rely on is really good. Now do something about it. You're not going to solve everything. Pick one or two things that you think are actionable and then talk to your folks about those. So exit recruitment data, exit data, engagement survey data, and then the two other things that we looked at, which both fall under the category of safety, are every 3 years we do a safety survey that's sponsored by DuPont, and it generates what's called a relative culture strength score. So where are you on a scale of how strong your safety culture is at the facility? And we have lots of learning and education around where you are on that scale says about the kind of culture in your facility. And then the fifth piece of data that we layered on top of that was our leading and lagging indicators in safety, because the way I've talked about safety for the last handful of years is, while it's important to understand, what you can see in the rear view mirror, what's more important is how to stave off and to look through the windshield going forward and avoid things that you're going to crash into that are going to cause injuries. And so that's been a big part of our safety culture. And we said those 5 things, my team helped our operations people kind of push together in the blender and mush them all up and say, what's the story now in your facility? And I wouldn't say overnight, but relatively quickly, all of our site leaders were able to see what the path forward looked like for them. And that it was perhaps different from site to site. Sure, there are commonalities, But as soon as they saw that vision and the path forward, their individual engagement and belief that they could affect change became that much more real. And we've just continued to run with that now over the last, year and a half to 2 years.
Very cool story. Great story. The individual belief that they could affect change, let's say around safety, which is obviously a critical issue. How did in what way were you able to give them the confidence that they could then go and actually make the change? So it's one thing to have that insight and say, okay, I know this should change, but am I going to be allowed to? Do I have to get approval? What kind of freedom of action do they have to implement based on the data you were giving them?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question. And I probably am a bit too flippant when it comes to the response, Phil, to be perfectly honest. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a real life example, and I'll tell you my response, and then I'll elaborate on it a little bit more. But 2019 is when we really started to lean into safety as the path through down which we could go to really get at the junk in the trunk, the underlying issues of some of the bureaucracy and perhaps unproductive politics or culture, if you will, in our organization. And we said, if the safety of our associates comes before anything else, has to come before productivity, has to come before, performance and efficiency. And I have been known to say to anybody who will listen, and I said it to our board of directors in Montreal a few years ago, we as management don't have the right to expect that our frontline associates care about productivity, efficiency, waste, any of those things until and unless they know first that we care about them and their safety and their well-being, period, full stop. And that gets some bristles. People will go, sounds good, but I'm not really sure if I'm bought into that. You just have to say it over and over and over and over again and find who your champions are. And so very early on in that journey, I had one of our facility, it was a regional leader, and he came to me and he said, Les, I've just realized all of my fall arrest equipment, so like all of the harnesses and things that you have to put on when you go up, a certain number of feet in the air. He said, they're all expired. And I said, and he said, well, I got to replace them all. I said, and he said, it's going to cost me like $50,000. I said, I don't understand the problem. And he said, it's $50,000. I said, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? And he said, well, but I can't spend $50,000. I said, what's the alternative? I said, are you going to send somebody knowingly up in the air on a piece of equipment with faulty, fall arrest equipment? And he said, well, isn't that the only choice I have? I said, no. It's a choice that you have. It's not the right choice. What are you uncomfortable about? Is it approaching your boss because you're afraid to spend $50,000? It's not in the budget. That's my favorite one. I didn't plan for this. What does doing the right thing mean? And so he was like, well, and I said, and then there's a way to say, you know what, do you really need every piece of equipment replaced tomorrow? Or could you say, I'll do it in, 3 chunks over the next 6 months or 12 months? Like, could that work? What are the solutions? And it's those kinds of conversations. I don't know, I've now come to know a few things about safety, but when I got put in charge of effecting our culture change in safety, those were the only things that I had to rely on, is just sort of practicality and the flippancy with which I looked at things and saying, you're going to spend $50,000 to protect your people. I guess you're going to spend it. And if you're worried about your leader not supporting that, I'll come with you and have that discussion if you want, or you go and have it. And if you get resistance, come and let me know. And so it's just been years of constantly aligning and realigning that focus, where I'm super proud to say there's probably, I would say, less than 5%, if that, of people in our organization who you could stop on the street, stop in any one of our facilities and say, what is your organization value above everything else? And they would say safety. And so it just takes that constancy. and consistency to talk about those kinds of things, and then to find your advocates, find those who have gone down that path, who can then, perpetuate the discussion. And, I don't know why I've been focused on the Atlantic in this conversation, but one of our leaders in Moncton, I remember early on, had said to me, when one of he had somebody challenge him about spending money on something and a piece of equipment for guarding, and he said, I can rationalize spending $25,000 on a piece of equipment to keep people safe. What I can't do, $25,000, $50,000, $100,000, I can't replace somebody's fingers once they've been cut off. And it was like, those are the things. It's so simple. And when you think about safety and what it means, it's not just safety for people that work in operations. It's our salespeople who are out on the road. It's our folks who have worked from home for, COVID. It's people coming back into the office now, and truly saying, we care about you as a person, and we care about your safety and all aspects of your well-being. Who in their right mind could ever disagree with the logic of that and the use of that messaging as a way to get at, all of that underlying, cultural junk that perhaps has bogged us down and been a weight on our shoulders, and not in a good way over time. And it's almost a bit liberating. But you can't use it like the crying wolf. And we've seen some of those before. There's somebody who used to tell a great story in our organization, that after a very serious incident, this is 15 some odd years ago, the idea of safety came up, and then everything was connected to safety. Someone would say, I have to paint lines, on the pavement in the parking lot, and it's a safety issue. It's like, it's probably not, but I get where you're coming from. Like, it can't be a crying wolf situation. You've really got to get at the heart of what it is you're trying to do. And when those situations would start to create anxiety now in today's day and age, where people go, holy smokes, like, I got a lot to spend, or I have a lot of things I need to do to keep my people safe. That becomes almost this virtuous circle that gets leaders motivated to say, there's a lot I need to do to keep, to keep my attention on my people and keeping them safe. But when you use, when it's safety, it's not your job, it's not my job, it's everybody's job and all of our responsibility to pitch in. And it really has been, I think, a tremendous contributor to how we've shaped our culture about, and have that really focused on the person and caring deeply about each other, both as, as coworkers and as individuals, because safety isn't just something that happens, in the four walls of our workplace. It extends beyond that.
Wow. So Les, I know our time is up. I just want to, I think if I were to just summarize this conversation, which has been great, the example from your CEO and involving your executive team and the insight that your HR folks are giving and the focus on safety, I think that the deeply humane, highly productive culture is a result of intentionality. It's not something that you just let happen. In each of those instances, in the stories you told, it's intentional. It is something you want to do, and you are persistent, and you are consistent, and you do what you need to do, and you guide your leaders. But it is a focused, we will behave this way, and we are here to help you, but this is what we are going to do. And I think that intentionality is probably critical to the success you've had, just as I listening to your stories, and the unwillingness to be swerved from what you know to be the outcome, which is really exciting. So
yeah, and we get it wrong from time to time, but when you know where the path is going, it's a whole lot easier to get back on it than falling and not knowing where you're headed. So it's fun.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the insight. It's a great example to follow. You probably have people calling you saying, hey, can we just come and chat a little more? So anyway,
well,
thank you again.
You that all the time. So thank you for allowing me to share some of those thoughts. And you and the Eagles Flight folks are welcome any day of the week in our business, and look forward to continuing to support you and your organization. You do great things with us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's very kind. Thanks a lot, Les. Take care.
This has been Leading What Matters Most with Phil Geldart. If you want to create a culture that drives performance and develop leaders that inspire and motivate, go to philgeldart.com. Leading What Matters Most is a production of Forbes Books.